The sitting is resumed. Senator Boyce, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. First, let me signal my wholehearted support for this Appropriations Bill 2018. Madam, you know the Appropriations Bill is for the amount which will be spent other than those statutory expenses such as personal emoluments and pensions and debt service. So when people see the difference between the figure in the appropriations bills is 1.8 billion, you see the figure in the estimates which is 4.2 or 4.3 billion, that the difference is really personal emoluments, which are statutory, and pensions, and which is statutory, and debt service, which is statutory as well. And just a little clarification, because sometimes people do ask me about that, but the difference between the two things. Madam President, I think the 19th contribution of this debate, and much has been said already. So I will try, Madam President, to confine my comments, in brief comments, to the matter of what may not have been said. I leave, Madam President, to you and colleagues to determine what brief is.
You have an hour.
Madam President, the estimates for this year project a revenue of about $3.2 billion and a total expenditure in the vicinity of $4.5 billion. And I think when you look at the estimates, you have to ask yourself a couple of questions. One is, do they make a border, as it were, with reality? Because sometimes, Madam President, we hear comments that the estimates by themselves don't mean anything and they don't have any relation to what really is going to happen. And so, Madam President, I've done a little comparison between what our estimates were for 2017-18 and what the outturn has been for the same year, 2017-18, just so we can establish some proximate accuracy of the estimates. Madam President, our estimates for 2017-18 in the area of revenue were for about $2.96 billion, and the actual outturn was just shy of $3 billion. So that seems to me fairly reasonable accuracy in the context that you're doing this thing for a year ahead. And when you break that down a little bit more, Madam President, the projection for tax revenue was just over $2.6 billion, and it came in at around $2.8 billion. The VAT projection was around about 959 million. It came in at $934 million. So, and you go through each of them. Excise, 246 million, came in at 311 million, and down you go. So, on the side of revenue projections, I think the estimates turning 2017, 2018 seem to have been a pretty close approximation to what the actual turnout was in 2017, 2018. And therefore, Madam President, may I suggest that we can treat the estimates for 2018-19 as if they are going to be reasonably proximate numbers for the year. 1819. In terms of expenditure, Madam President, I've had a quick look at the total current expenditure of the country, excluding the debt service. And let me say why I excluded debt service, because the debt service really, over the last few years, has tended to increase faster than anything else because we've had to do more borrowing. And we'll come to why we've had to do that and show you how we've reached there. So if I pull out this extraordinary, quote-unquote, extraordinary expenditure of debt service, interest and debt repayments, our total expenditure for 2017, we would have targeted to spend $2 billion, just over $2 billion, $2.1 billion in expenditure, and we spent $2.3 billion in expenditure. Once again, in the context of the estimates for a big government, then you can expect that that is not a bad approximation in terms of the projections for expenditure. Not as close as the revenue projections, but still relatively close, within comfortable about 10% margin of the estimates. So, Madam President, I have reasonable confidence that these estimates represent a fairly good approximation of what we will have. Now, Madam President, another measure that I use is to look at what happened in 2017-18 and to compare it what happened in 2016-17, just to see whether we are moving in the kind of direction we wish to move in in these estimates. Madam President, I know it's right after lunch, and I'm determined to follow my profession of accounts and economics and finance, but I hope I don't bore you or my colleagues so much with these things that they begin to slumber. I'm sure, Madam President, they'll do me the courtesy of staying awake. But, Madam President, 2016-17, our total revenue was $2.75 billion. 2017-18, it was $3 billion. So the revenue seems to be going in the direction which we want it to go in if we're going to be able to meet the expenses and close the fiscal gap. And we saw improvements, Madam President, in our tax revenue. Particularly, we saw improvements in the corporation tax revenue, moving from $248 million to $269 million, which suggests our corporations are getting a little bit more profitability in them. We had a slight dip in income tax. We had a good increase in value-added tax from $890 million to $934 million. A good increase in excise tax from $227 million to $311 million. Madam President, I think that says, I don't need to say more numbers there. It says that in terms of the revenue, we are moving reasonably right direction if we take it as the objective is to reduce the fiscal deficit so that we do not have to borrow as much as we're borrowing. And Madam President, when we look at current expenditure, our expenditure on current expenditure in 2016-17, including amortization, was $3.8 billion. In 2017-18, it was $4.3 billion. So it's gone up, Madam President. Why has it gone up that much? Because, Madam President, our amortization, debt repayment in 2017-18 was comfortably 350 million more than what it was in 2016-17. When we pull away, Madam President, that increase in amortization, we come to a position where our actual expenditure in 2017-18 was very much on target to what it was in 2016-17. The point, Madam President, is that there has not been any runaway spending on the core services of government when we compare 2016-17 with 2017-18. And ever so often, you hear about runaway spending, but when you pull away the interest and the debt service, the payments, you realize that we're actually staying the course on that. Couple more examples, Madam President. The wages bill in 2016-17 was about $726 million. In 2017-18, it was $723 million. So that has kept fairly constant. The goods and services bill, Madam President, in 2016-17 was $393 million. It was the same thing, $392 million, 2017-18. The transfers were $1.14 billion in 2016-17. The transfers in 2017-18, $1.19 billion. And Madam President, I don't wish to weary you with the numbers, but I just want to make a general point that on those fundamental parts of that basic structure of the public service, there's not been any runaway spending. No runaway spending on transfers, no runaway spending on goods and services, no runaway spending on wages and salaries and pensions and so on. So, Madam President, that is, I think that I've established that the estimates as produced have generally been reasonably good projectors, and that we are moving, and we have been moving, Madam President, for the last couple of years in the right direction, both on expenditure, core expenditure, and on revenue. Now, Madam President, I'd like to cast my eyes over the statistical trend over a number of years. And while I was doing that in respect of the fiscal numbers, something came to my attention. I believe that very few persons would wish to say that the fiscal situation in 2007-2008 was as tight, as difficult as it is now in 2017-2018. Madam President, when I looked at some numbers supplied to me, which have been supplied to me every year for a little while, I saw that the fiscal deficit in 2007-2008, fiscal deficit done up on the basis of the national financial institutions, was 3.5% of GDP. The fiscal deficit that is projected for 2017-18 is 3.7% of GDP. Let me say it again, Madam President. The deficit 2007-8 was 3.5% of GDP. The deficit 2017-18 is expected to be 3.7% of GDP. My only comment on that, Madam President, is to ask the question, if 3.5% deficit in 2007-8 was not outlandish, was not something to go crazy about, how do we step and say 3.7% deficit in 2017-18 is something that we have to go berserk about? It is not, Madam President, this is not to say that we should not keep on trying to bring the deficit down. But, Madam President, you do not bring a deficit down in one fell swoop. You have to take your time and bring it down, otherwise you cause too much disruption in your business, whether you're a government or you're a private sector corporation. So the only point I'm making, Madam President, is for there to be fairness and balance when we look at the situation. The 3.5% deficit 10 years ago was not something for us to cry all kind of alarm now. 3.7 should not be. And the 3.7, Madam President, is on a downward trajectory. It has come down from 2 or 3 years ago, and the projection is that it will go down further next year. So, Madam President, I put that out for a little consumption, for people to think about in this, and how we're doing business in the country. Madam President, we also often hear about how greatly overtaxed the economy is. We hear particularly now how greatly overtaxed the economy is. Madam President, if that's the case now, has been the case for at least 10 years, for at least 12 years, because in 2007-8, the ratio of tax revenue to the total production of goods and services in the economy was 33%. 2017-18, this current year is estimated to be 29.5%. So, Madam President, we cannot look at the same numbers and sing one tune for one set of numbers, another tune for the second set of numbers, when they are both in the same range of size. So it's 29.5. If 33% of GDP was not over taxation then, why is 29.5% over taxation now? But, Madam President, I know that some part of the problem may be where the taxation came, some of the taxation came in 2007, 2008. Because at that time, we were getting a large percentage of our corporation tax revenue from the international business services sector. Since 2008, when the crisis came, we lost maybe $75, $80 million in taxes in 2008, similar amount in 2009. We lost then a couple $100 million thereafter, 2010 going on, from the international business sector. This is per year. So what has happened is that in order for us to do some other things, to keep the structure of government going, the taxation that we lost in the national business sector had to be made up from the local economy. So if we lost 3% of GDP taxation from the international business sector, then we would have to try to recover some of that from the local economy. And so, Madam President, you see, I'm not trying to play any smart. I'm just setting out the facts as they are. And maybe it is because that rather more of the amount comes from the local economy than because we've lost some stuff from the international economy. That may be what drives people's notion of why that's their notion of why they think that they're so heavily taxed. But Madam President, let me come now to this matter once again. This matter of the taxation in the international business sector. When we lost it, particularly after 2010, when the Canadians changed the tax-exempt surplus rules, and which hurt Barbados. Let me just explain that very briefly. Prior to 2010, Barbados enjoyed, because of its avoidance of double taxation treaty with Canada, an arrangement such that profits made in Barbados by Canadian companies, when those profits were remitted to Canada, they were sent back to Canada and did not have to pay tax when they went back to Canada. 2008 or 9, Canada changed its tax legislation to make sure that once you did a tax information exchange agreement, that you would enjoy that privilege as well. So Canadian companies in Barbados then moved from having this specialized status with their taxes to the same status as Canadian companies anywhere else in the world that had that tax information exchange agreement. We moved from being special to being just one of so many more. We lost that competitive advantage. That kicked in from 2010, and we had a choice to make in 2010. Here were the options. Do not change the tax rate on the international business companies. Yeah. We were asked by the international business companies to change the tax rates, and on the basis that if the tax rates were changed, they would stay in Barbados. We knew that would cost us some taxation revenue. It was very clear, if the tax rates were not lowered, that those companies would have left Barbados. And those were the companies that pay the most taxes and also employ the most people. So we had a choice. Keep the rates where they were, lose the same tax revenue, because they would have gone, and lose in the meantime, lose in the process, 2,000 jobs. Jobs to 2,000 people who work in the national business sector or related to the national business sector. That was one alternative. That alternative was to lower the tax rate. You lose the $200 million in tax revenue, but you kept all 4,000 jobs in the sector. So the choice was between keeping those 2,000 jobs that would have gone or losing them. You would have lost the same amount of tax revenue. And Madam President, that tax revenue was paid in foreign currency. So when you lost that tax revenue, you also lost foreign exchange reserves that would have come through that tax revenue. So Madam President, we took the decision. And you know, sometimes people in these sectors do not stop and think when you give them support. When you give support to the working classes, to the poor people, everybody says you're giving subsidies to the poor people. When you support the hospital, everybody says you're giving too much money to your hospital until it affects them when they need to get a service. When you give money to welfare, everybody says you're giving too much to welfare. When you surrendered that 200 million to keep the jobs of 2,000 people, nobody thought that that was a support for our professional classes in this country. But the professional classes in law, accounting, and finance, and so on and so forth. But that is what it was, Madam President. And sometimes you hear people in the professional classes saying about governments that they don't give them this, they don't give them that, they fund everything themselves, but they forget sometimes these particular benefits, where for $200 million a year, we were able to keep those jobs. And of course, we were able to keep most of the $900 million a year in foreign exchange that the sector brings in. And that is why we made a decision. One, to keep all the jobs, and two, to keep most of that foreign exchange coming into the country to help to support our currency peg. We did that. And Madam President, did we do the wrong thing? What would my colleague senators have done put in that position? Would they have wished the government to let those 2,000 people go home with their families? Would they have wanted that? I cannot think, Madam President, that any one of my colleague senators would have wished to have that situation happen. I'm with you, Madam President, because when you say these things, people think it's just little numbers that you're looking at. You're looking and seeing people's lives, people's livelihoods, people's career paths, people's children being affected by these decisions. If that's the wrong thing, Madam President, to have done, and I had to do it again, I would do it again, Madam President. And go praise my God. People are important. But Madam President, having given up that income, that $200 million, between that money that we lost in the offshore sector, that's really where we lost most of our revenue, in the offshore sector. And when you lose 10% of your revenue, your income, year after year after year, you have to find ways to pay the bills. Or you have to reduce those bills even more than you have reduced them. So, Madam President, which bills would we have had to reduce? Let me start with the transfers. Everybody talks about the transfers. They transfer too much money to these state organizations. Should we have given the QEH $50 million less? They were at 120 or 130 in 2007-8, and we had to move them rapidly up to 185 or thereabouts for them to be able to render the critical service that they're called upon to render for the country. Should we have brought them back down to 130? I don't think so, Madam President. Should we have cut the subsidy we make to the Transport Board? I think it must be, I don't know, probably up in $50 million a year. I don't think so, Madam President. And if we'd done that, the Transport Board would have had to, and the transport system would have had to raise bus fares. And it isn't largely middle class, the upper class that drives in Transport Board, or the public transport system. Not in Barbados. It is the working class person that does that. What you want in a situation, a climate, where neither the private sector nor government is able to afford substantial or any wage increase, to have increased the bus fares, but double the bus fares, Madam President, or treble them to be able to cut the subsidies in Transport Board. Indeed, Madam President, Transport Board, you know, we try and give them what we can. Madam President, what would people have us do? Cut the Transport Board, subsidies the Transport Board, raise the bus fares to those people? Madam President, while this crisis of getting the revenue from the international business sector was occurring, we also saw some problems in the tourism sector. And we decided to put some money into that sector right away to help people get through the hard times. Maybe they have forgotten. Maybe they have forgotten because some people, we have done nothing. We put in, I think it was 25 million, whatever it was, immediately, bam, bam, bam. So, to help the sector. Did we do the right thing? Should we have left them to sink or swim? Should we have left them to sink or swim? Madam President, should we have cut the allocations then to the community college and the Samuel Jackman Prescott Institute as another's? Or should we have cut the amounts to the primary schools or the amounts to the secondary schools? I don't think we should have. We didn't. I don't think any of my Senate colleagues inside here would have wanted to take that decision to cut those institutions. I know maybe the middle class can pay their way, or the upper income people can pay their way, but most Barbadians need to have the schools subsidized so that we can continue our upward path for them. Madam President, we did a little something with the summer camps. We put in some summer camps. We were only able to give, was it 6 weeks in the summer? I think it's 6 weeks in the summer. Personally, Madam President, I would like to do 8 weeks in the summer, 4 Easter and 3 at Christmas. Because the way I feel about protecting children, I feel we should give them that thing all the time. But we couldn't afford it. So we spend, I don't know, we spend $6 or $7 million a year. $6 or $7 million a year only, Madam President, for those camps. And yet you hear people say, when you ask them where you've been a spendthrift, you spend money on camps. Cut the camps out. And do what with all those little children who belong to working class people, parents, and have nobody help look after them. Say there. Madam, I raise this because sometimes you have to sit and look at the whole configuration of issues that you're dealing with. And how do you pick them? Which ones do you do? How do you try to make sure that you balance this society while not destroying its economic viability? So, Madam President, if you have to borrow equivalent $200 million a year additional, that over the course of 7 years, Madam President, as I said last 9 years, almost 9 years, it's $1.6 billion. Is that $1.6 billion that was spent on frivolity? Part of it went to keep the tourism industry and marketing the tourism industry going so that we could keep getting a few tourists inside here and get some foreign exchange and some jobs going. And Madam President, we add on the interest on that $1.6 billion at the higher interest rates that we have in Barbados. Madam President, it must come to over $2 billion of additional debt the country's taken on. Now we've been trained for the last few years to bring down that, to make sure that we have more revenue than before, so that we can bring down that level of borrowing, and they've done that. They've reduced the borrowing from the central bank. But Madam President, this is no fancy economics, this is running. This is how you have to run a business, run a household. And Madam President, I haven't gone to the stage where I have to go to. Most of that money that goes into the statutory corporations goes to pay wages and salaries. It doesn't go for any fancy stuff, Madam President. Wages and salaries. Most of what government spends itself, about $750 million on wages and salaries directly, in addition to $300 million or so in retirement and benefits, which are fixed amounts. Madam President, I seem to recall that there was a study done, it must have been the early 2000s, late 90s, 2000s, by a former governor of Central Bank, who found that our public sector needed to be trimmed, and trimmed substantially. I am not calling the person's name. I haven't got permission from him or you, Madam President. I am not going to call the numbers. I don't remember them clearly. And therefore don't wish to say what is wrong. But Madam President, I seem to recall from as early as 2000, or thereabouts, there has been a call to reduce the size of the public service wage bill. Senator Sir Roy, whose job it was to remember all these things and to take careful note of them, would be able to tell us the exact numbers. But Madam President, when you are at a stage where the economy, the world economy, your own economy, is struggling, how do you go and even go halfway towards the numbers that had been suggested in that earlier study to which I referred? I think the figure, it was nearly 10,000 or something like that. I don't remember, Madam President, but it was a big figure, big figure.
It was about 5 digits.
But Madam President, I say this again because people think that when you say this thing, you're trying to issue threats and so on.
That's right.
I'm not in business of issuing threats. I don't believe in issuing threats. If I tell you something, Madam President, it's never a threat. If it's something that is, it's always a promise, never a threat. And I don't promise too easily. So, Madam President, the issue is, I'm coming to that issue, that if you were to deal with this matter we have with revenue, and you can go back your numbers and see it happened from 2008, 2009, coming through, until two or 3 years ago, when it began to come back up again. You either had to cut your transfers to the institutions, including the sacred cows that we all have for institutions, and cut the transfers to programs, including sacred cows that we have for programs, or we would have to cut people. And even when you cut the programs and cut these transfers to institutions, you're cutting people. And President, let me have a guess in our head. And who wants to cut out that number of people that will to be able to balance a budget in the short run and cause destruction? If you had to lay off, Madam President, 5,000 public officers or 7,000 public officers, and then the private sector, that is going to reduce the demand for private sector goods and services. So they're going to lay off too. Madam President, you're talking about putting into distress maybe 50,000, 60,000 people who do not know where their income is going to come from, where their bread is going to come from. So, Madam President, it isn't that you don't try to do things. Attrition has taken care of some of the numbers, and you try to rejig the work and so on, so that we don't have to go down that route of just disrupting the society, disrupting people's lives like that. But that was one way to go with dealing with the loss in revenue. But Madam President, I don't think any of us like that approach, because we are, in our hearts, we are decent human beings. Or, Madam President, we ought to be decent human beings. I'm going to take advice. So, Madam President, that is the issue of wages. And when we think about laying off people, some must think that the people they were talking about laying off would be those at the bottom. But, Madam President, anyhow you had to lay off persons to be able to save that revenue from the 200 million, you were going to be laying off all around, from the top to the bottom. Everybody was going to get cut. We have to get cut. And we fought this battle already in 1981, we fought it in 1992. We fought it. Same people, we fought it. 3 times to me, Madam President, 3 times to Senator Roy, if not 4. 3 times to Senator Roy. And each time we made a decision. We could not cause Barbadians to go through that kind of suffering that people wanted us to go through if that was the case. So, Madam President, we come to what other approach we could take. We could have gone to the IMF. We know the standard. Then we could argue with them not to on the devaluation bit of it. But, Madam President, you wouldn't be able to argue with them cogently on the matter of wages, the matter of people. You couldn't argue them cogently on the matter of the haircuts on the debt. And that haircut would affect all our pension plans, our national insurance, and our national insurance assets and so on. Did anybody really want us to go to the IMF to get some balance of payment support, to get some fiscal support at the price of the haircuts that they have demanded in Jamaica, and demanded in St. Kitts, and demanded in Grenada, and demanded in Belize, and other places where people had got back substantially less capital, less principal than what they had invested in government paper. We want to go to a stage where we did the kind of layoffs which will satisfy the numbers. I don't think so, Madam President. But I told you I was going to be brief, Madam President. And I shall be. I think I only have 1.5 more. Or something. How much? 17. Madam President, your watch must be wrong. Now, Madam President, let me, in that little time I have left there, given the accuracy of your watch, let me raise a couple other things. Madam President, we in the Ministry of Education, I must support the Ministry of Education for the wonderful work that they have done with the nursery schools. Very important, and I've been lucky to have been asked to coordinate to some of the relationships between Maria Holder Memorial Trust and the ministry, government ministries in that regard, and I'm happy for that experience. But Madam President, it amazes me how they were able to build that large school. Now, they still owe me some work on Harrison College, but I have yielded that let them do law school first, since they said that was in a more precarious state physically than Harrison College was. How that can be imagined, Madam President, puts one to the test, because I know what kind of state the physical plan of Harrison College is in. But Madam President, they fixed large school, and they fixed some other schools too. And they did, and one of my pet peeves was this question of the people at 16 years old being not allowed to go on to some kind of tertiary education. be it A-levels, technical school, whatever. And Minister Jones and I would speak about it every Tuesday, because as soon as he sees me, he knows I was going to ask him what's happening with these schools. That is something that has happened, Madam President. It may be we could have reduced spending there, I don't know. But Madam President, what I want to reduce the opportunity for those 2,016-year-olds to get a little extra training that they could find jobs. Would any of us, Madam President, want to take that responsibility? I do not think so. I certainly would not. So, Madam President, we have to congratulate the Ministry of Education for that, and we have to keep on supporting them. Madam President, I want to just say one thing for tourism. I do not know how the Ministry of Tourism, how the Boyce Tourism Marketing Inc., BTA, has managed to get as much airlift into this country in the last couple of years that they have done, because they have had a reduced budget, I think, in almost every year. And they've been able, to stretch the dollar and be able to get more people inside this country in the last several years. Madam President, do we begrudge them was it $19 million they get now in BTA? But they used to get 110. But 120. But now they're doing better with less. And sometimes when you give a fellow too much money to spend, all you do is waste the money. When I went to school, you used to get so much money a week, and Skipper, if you spent that money before the time, you had to go and borrow some from the body. If you borrow from me, I would charge you interest on it. Because you should have known how to manage your money. But is that a bad decision to keep them going? If to be able to bring in that foreign exchange that we have. Madam President, I am going to say a little bit of something about two more things. One about the energy portfolio, which I have responsibility, and the second one, I'm going to talk a little bit more. One thing about tourism, 1A, 2A, and 2B, is going to be about CLECO and British American. And ask a couple of questions. Madam President, given what we have seen in the last 2 years, in terms of the numbers employed in construction and tourism industry, and the persons employed directly in the tourism industry, do we honestly believe that the incentives that we gave to the tourism industry have been misplaced? Do we believe they're misplaced in the context where we've had to support the national business sector by $200 million a year foregone revenue? I don't think so, Madam President. And secondly, Madam President, how would any of us have dealt with the situation with CLECO and British American Insurance Company? Howsoever caused. Then how would we have dealt with the policy holders? Would we have left persons who held life insurance policies and pension policies to go to the dogs? Would we not all have wanted to help them to have restoration of their pension policies and their life insurance policies? The person with the executive, not fancy one there, I'm not going to address that one. But I don't know what it's called, and I will never know what it's called either. The persons who had life insurance policies, who had pension policies, Madam President, we could not let them just go down the drain like that. And that would add to our debt. But Madam President, and indeed, I think that interest on that workout is going to cost us $20 million in 2018, 19. So any numbers there? Madam President, would any of us have loved to have those people just go to the wall with nothing at all? I don't think so. It took longer And we expected, because we went the route that had been proposed by one and all, except ourselves. And Madam President, anyhow. But it's got there now, it's getting sorted out. Was that the wrong decision to help those people, or should we have let them go to the wall? Should we have forgotten to, should we have stopped giving, should we not have paid the BDF pensions and make the BDF pensions whole? That's one of the things we had to do, and we did it. Was that a bad decision? I said, put yourself in our positions. Is that what you would have done or would not have done? No, Madam President. Would we have refused to do the investments in the alternative energy sector, renewable energy sector? 5 years ago, 6 years ago, we had no installed capacity, no grid connected capacity, no capacity, generating capacity powered by renewable energy, which was connected up to the light and power grid. This last year, we reached 27 and 28 megawatts of connections to the grid. We have unused allocations of 10 megawatts for the light and power company, 20 megawatts for larger independent power producers, 10 megawatts for the government and government corporations. Work is going on by all those people to use up those allocations. So I reckon that in another year and a half, those allocations will be used up. And before that, by the middle of this year, we expect we will have more capacity allocated for additional renewable energy to come into the grid. Government itself, Madam President, has a program called the Public Sector Smart Energy Program to equip over 13 government buildings with solar PV after retrofitting them to make them more energy efficient, make them better users of energy. And Madam President, we're doing that so we can save, so the government can save itself millions of dollars each year that is now paying out in electricity costs. And so that it can also add to the power. Madam President, we had a smart fund for small business people, that they could borrow from that smart fund at preferential rates, and that they could fix their businesses and put on renewable energy. That, Madam President, we're now in negotiations to renew that fund and expand that fund so we can reach further with it. We're now in negotiations, Madam President, on a matter which will allow us to install most energy efficient lighting in households in Barbados in a way that enables, that prevents the household from having to find the capital to do it, but enables him to repay that capital, pay that amount of money each month in his power bill. We have to have discussions with the Fair Trading Commission on the matter and with the power company. We've begun to have some discussions with the power company. But that, Madam President, is part of what we're trying to do to reduce the cost of energy to the man in the street, as well as to make Barbados a greener place. And when we've done this first pilot, which will cost about $5 million US, we will expand it and try to get it out into some of the smaller hotels and so on, so that they can also improve their operations. As part of the effort to make sure that we build some more resilience into our operations, Madam President, we have used some of the funds that Minister McLean spoke about this morning to be able to equip some of our schools, our primary schools, with renewable energy. Senator Husband spoke about it. Some of our the the beach centers, that the NCC looks after, and so on. Madam President, 17 schools, including a couple of secondary schools, and the University of West Indies, part of the University of West Indies, have got, thank you, Madam President, have got solar PV systems on them, 17 schools. We have, Madam President, we have 8 national NCC facilities that have got the thing on it. Madam President, we are now doing, there are another 17 schools, around 22 schools, Madam President, and schools and community centers for which we sign contracts to put renewable energy on them. And that's what I mean. And even of disaster, you have some distributed power. We have, and if I'm going to polyclinics, we have 9 of them. We have 9 polyclinics that we're going to put on the renewable energy on, and those contracts are out for tender as we speak, Madam President. So we've tried to do some things with renewable energy. We had to borrow some money for it. It goes onto the debt, it goes into the expenditure, but you know what? It will yield us savings over time. For several years, savings in electricity costs, and we also generate some revenues from it. So, Madam President, since you have decided I should only have half the time I should have to follow your instructions. But I just wish to, in my contribution today, just outline for people some of the considerations that will have to go on once you're in position of making decisions for the country, to explain a little bit about the estimates of expenditure and revenue, to explain where we have reached, to explain the direction that we're going in, to explain how we got there, explain why we cannot move any faster, and to show that while we were aiming to get a fiscal balance and get a good debt position, and we still cannot throw out the social fabric, we cannot throw out the social system which has helped us, all of us, Madam President, to reach this point in our lives. We should not, having reached here, kick the bucket down for the rest who follow after us. And so, Madam President, I'm pleased to support this appropriation bill, and I thank you.